At 9 o'clock p.m. the following evening, July 15, 1969, the eve of liftoff, CBS News presented a special program entitled Man on the Moon. Walter Cronkite anchored this preview of the Apollo 11 mission. Now to CBS News and Walter Cronkite.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep.
And from the beginning, from the time he ventured forth from his first cave, man has been a wanderer, a seeker of horizons. Even in biblical times, there was search for the promised land, and the 500-mile-long exodus from Egypt lit an historic flame. How races reach their home countries is an unknown, but man's great voyages are historic, as with the longboats of Leif Erikson, as with the man who sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Every schoolboy knows what he found. Stanley discovered Livingston in what is now Tanzania. Peary discovered the North Pole in 1886. But all man's great adventures, even the inner discoveries of mind and medicine, took place in man's own environment. 4 days from tomorrow, if all goes as scheduled, man will first set foot on the moon. That's a journey of about 250,000 miles. He has come to 9.4 miles of reaching it before, but that 9.4 miles is greater than all the distances man ever has traveled. It takes us to the tomorrow of the universe.
And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
CBS News presents Man on the Moon. The epic journey of Apollo 11 on the eve of that historic event. Sponsored by Western Electric, manufacturing and supply unit of the Bell System, and by the International Paper Company, where good ideas grow on trees, and by Maxim, freeze-dried coffee.
Good evening, I'm Walter Cronkite, and on this eve of man's first flight toward a landing on the moon, all preparations go smoothly. The weather prediction, along with the health of astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins, seem coordinated with that giant Saturn V for a go at 9:32 Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow morning. CBS Television's color coverage will begin at 6 a.m. Former President Johnson, the man many regard as responsible for our commitment to exploring the moon, is here. So is Vice President Agnew, the chairman of the task force that President Nixon has asked to shape our post-Apollo space program. There will be an estimated 300 members of Congress on hand for the launch, some 5,000 VIPs, and about half the million tourists earlier estimates called for. Among them are members of the Poor People's Campaign, praising the flight of Apollo 11, even as they question its priority. The goal is the moon, perhaps man's oldest dream. If all goes well, some 112 hours and 50 minutes after liftoff, Neil Armstrong will step on the lunar surface. The proposed landing site is here on the southwestern side of what a learned astronomer called the Sea of Tranquility. It will be anything but tranquil for astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin. As Mike Collins remains in the command module orbiting above them, they will fly in the lunar module down and backwards at more than 3,000 miles an hour before they put the brakes on to land at this unofficial spaceport. What they find may be cheese, but it's more likely to look like a small area of Arizona, which is believed naturally to resemble the moon's surface. There, geologists have put together an imitation of what the astronauts expect to find at landing site 2.
This is planned landing area number 2, built by the United States Geological Survey. An exact replica blasted out of the cinders by carefully placed explosives, perfectly duplicating photographs of the lunar landing site. I'm George Herman here in this simulated landing area at Cinder Lake in Arizona. And these are some of the kinds of material ejected by the force of the explosion. Rock, for example, possibly volcanic like this specimen, but solid. Particulate matter like these cinders, and possibly also rock dust, very fine. And also those strange clumps of cohesive material, somewhat like peat sand or like lumps of mud, which cohere but can easily be broken up. A good deal of the ejected material is concentrated in rays around the crater. As you can perhaps see in this shot through the window of the Lem trainer, the rays lead directly to the crater and are made up of both the lighter and the darker ejected material, humps from the hummocks of cinders around the edge. And as you get closer to the edge, you can see the distinctive features of an impact or explosion crater, particularly the sharp rise up to the edge and then the steep fall away down inside. These are typical of newer, younger craters. In time, erosion will soften these craters. The processes of the wind, the rain, the cracking force of the ice, and of course our teeming life here on Earth will make this a softer, smoother, rounder thing. Meteor Crater, for example, nearby here in Arizona, is not old compared with the mountains of the moon, and yet it already has a more softly rounded look of erosion at work. There's erosion on the moon as well, of course. The fact of micrometeorites impacting on the surface, the shock from bigger meteorites and from possible moonquakes is going to do some eroding. And to test that and see the process at work and to gauge it, the astronauts have brought along some tools. A hammer and a sampler. It's a simple process. Drive the sampler into the soil. If it's as soft as some scientists think, they can simply push it in. If not, to get it in all the way, the side of the geologist's hammer to drive it down to its full depth. And then out it comes, and there would be 16 inches of lunar surface. The top few inches probably bleached by the solar wind and the radiation from the sun, but under that, who knows? Possibly some spores of life or some bacteria. It would be a great scientific discovery. It could also be a great danger if they turned out to be unfriendly to Earth life forms, including astronauts. And on down beyond that, still further questions to be answered. Some scientists think they might strike ice, frozen water under the surface of the moon. Extremely important for the future of lunar exploration, if it should turn out to be true. In all, in this one little tube, 16 inches of the history of the moon.
But up to now, what do we know about the moon's origin? Was it initially a satellite or a smaller planet captured into Earth orbit? Some scientists contend that the moon was spun off by the Earth, like mud from the rim of a turning wheel. One widely accepted theory holds that our solar system was once a cloud of interstellar hydrogen, waiting to be born 5 billion years ago. The sun was formed first. Then the protoplanets, the Earth and the moon, were shaped to circle the sun. The moon cooled first, its outer crust hardening. Giant asteroids colliding with the moon broke its crust, releasing seas of molten lava. As the lava formed seas, impact debris became the mountains of the moon. When the crust cooled, fissures opened and ridges formed. Later, volcanic pressure and meteoroids shaped craters that fitted virtually all of the moon's surface. All of this is theory, however. We should know a good deal more about the moon next Sunday. That's what we're going there for.
The moon has been such a mystery to men, who have compared it to everything from a dead princess to a ghostly galleon tossed upon windswept seas, that it is little wonder that the race for her should have reached such desperation and seemed, a little more than a decade ago, so improbable.
As Sputnik 1 let loose a beat heard round the world, exploring space became serious business, not just science fiction fantasy. The Russian launching of the first artificial satellite marked the beginning of a new age, with a space-oriented view of man and his destiny, a second Copernican revolution. More Russian successes followed. Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space. He orbited the Earth in Vostok 1 for 108 minutes. There were more Russian firsts. Valentina Tereshkova, the first space woman. Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space. Zone 5, the first unmanned vehicle to circle the moon and return to Earth. That the Russians would land a man on the moon before us seemed inevitable. A month after Gagarin's flight, we sent the first American into space. Alan Shepard rode Freedom 7 in a suborbital load 302 miles downrange. The one-man Mercury program was off to a good start. However, Gagarin's achievement paled our first splashdown and recovery. 9 months later, we matched the Russian feat. Astronaut John Glenn in a Mercury Atlas orbited the Earth 3 times in Friendship 7. President John F. Kennedy's exhortation to land a man on the moon before this decade was out seemed possible. It was the 2-man Gemini program, however, that gave us a decisive lead over the Russians. In less than 5 years, the U.S. accomplished techniques that made us first in space. Ed White became the first American to walk in space, and Gemini's major objective, a space rendezvous, was achieved. Astronauts Wally Schirra and Thomas Stafford flew Gemini 6 within inches of Gemini 7 and in formation for several hours. 3 months later, astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott, flying Gemini 8, achieved a space rendezvous and docking with their Agena target vehicle. The U.S. had 2 firsts, the world's first docking, but also its first near tragedy in space. Mechanical problems in the spacecraft caused it to go into a violent spin. The astronauts made an emergency landing in the Pacific. This was one of 2 close calls lunar astronaut Armstrong was to experience. The docking of the 2 space vehicles brought us a step closer to Project Apollo and the Moon. In 1962, LOR, Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, and the 3-stage Saturn V launch vehicle had been selected by NASA as the means to get there. A LEM, lunar module, would fly to the moon's surface and return the astronauts to the Lunar Orbiting Command Module. Photographs from Ranger, Surveyor, and Lunar Orbiter showed where the LEM could land and what the moon's surface looked like. NASA announced that astronauts Gus Grissom, Edwin White, and Roger Chaffee would be the crew for the first manned Apollo flight. A month before the launch, a flash fire in the spacecraft killed the 3 during a test on Cape Kennedy's Pad 34. This tragedy was the most damaging for the program. Costs mounted as more setbacks and delays developed. 1967 also was a bad year for the Russians. Cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov was killed when his spacecraft Soyuz 1 crashed after a parachute failure. A few months later, Yuri Gagarin died in an airplane accident. It was almost 2 years before either country had another manned space flight. Apollo 7, the first manned Apollo flight, was launched successfully in the fall of 1968. Astronauts Schirra, Isley, and Cunningham successfully tested the launch vehicle, spacecraft, and ground systems in Earth orbital flight. 2 months later, we had our greatest triumph. Apollo 8, carrying astronauts Borman, Lovell, and Anders, was launched into space by a Saturn V. The 3 broke free of Earth's gravity for the first time in history, traveling 250,000 miles to the moon, orbiting 10 times at altitudes as low as 69 miles, and returning to a safe splashdown in the Pacific. All that remained before attempting a lunar landing was a manned test of the LEM. And one LEM trainer flight almost killed astronaut Armstrong, who will be our first man on the moon. In space, Apollo 9 and 10 tested the manned operation of the entire Apollo spacecraft, 9 in Earth orbital flight and 10 in lunar orbit, with the LEM descending to within 10 miles of the lunar surface. We were now ready to challenge our own technology and land a man on the moon. The Earth and the moon seemed to have been chosen by a kind of cosmic fate, just as the Earthmen who were scheduled to be first to visit the moon were picked by chance. Donald Deke Slayton, who was ruled out of spaceflight for medical reasons early in the program, today is Director for Flight Crew Operations, and he explained how the crew of Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins was picked.
So you have to have a number of crews that are essentially equal, all prepared to do the job, and then whichever one happens to come on the line of commission that happens to land, those are the guys. And I think all of our people have recognized that for the last couple of years, that we had a group of about 21 guys, any 3 of which had about an equal chance of landing on the moon, depending on how the program evolved.
Chance chose a 38-year-old American named Neil Armstrong to be the first man to set foot on the moon. He's from Wapakoneta, Ohio, population 6,700, which was named after an Indian tribe of the Shawnee Nation. Edwin Buzz Aldrin was born in Montclair, New Jersey, and Michael Collins, of American parents, in Rome, Italy, which gives a symbolic, geographical, and national mix to the mission. All of them grew up in small or middle-sized communities, which fits one of history's laws. Great adventurers seldom come from cities of great population or sophistication. Those close to the crew say that Armstrong is the commander in more than just the titular sense. He's a man of strong personality, a civilian test pilot, to whom his wife says, silence is a Neil Armstrong answer. The word no is an argument. His obsession with flight started when he was 9. For Buzz Aldrin, called the best scientific mind we have sent into space, it started even earlier. His father, who holds a pilot's license at 73, was a friend of Orville Wright, and Charles Lindbergh, and Robert Goddard, who pioneered rockets even before Buck Rogers. Mike Collins, who will fly the command module while Armstrong and Aldrin walk the moon, is the product of a military family. His father and brother are generals. His uncle, the General Lightning Joe Collins of World War II fame. To some extent, their backgrounds then, and to a great extent, their dedication to flying, these men are alike as peas in a pod, and probably different from anyone you've ever known in your life.
It's probable that none were more individualistic than the 11th Wally Schirra, the only man to have flown in all 3 of our manned space programs. The other day we reminisced with him at Cape Kennedy's Pad 14, where he first lifted off on October 3rd, 1962. Wally must bring back a lot of memories coming out here to Pad 14.
It's quite a surprise to me to see this again, Walter. The desolate area that we're in, where it used to be so busy, we come running down here, anxious to get off on a mission, and now it's quite quiet. It's really a surprise.
What was your emotion, Wally, when you first saw a big rocket fired and knew that someday you were going to be riding on the nose of a firecracker like that?
Well, same thought still occurred. Whether I say no. Chris, when I was first interviewed for the space program, I didn't want to say no. I was involved in a rather exciting airplane, and I thought there's nothing better than that. The concept of flying in a vehicle, although it was a manned vehicle, at the beginning it was more of a guinea pig venture. And I wasn't about to be a successor to a chimpanzee.
You know, in those early days, I think that all of us following the program, to whom you were our heroes, felt that one of you Mercury 7 astronauts would be the first to go to the moon. Thought maybe all of you would be going to the moon. Now we find that none of you, well, maybe Cooper and Shepard is back in the program, well, but most of you won't. We feel rather badly about that, do you?
Well, there was a time, of course, when, as the momentum progressed during the preparation for Apollo, that we felt very much desirous of making these flights. I know I felt very keenly. But I can also recall when we first started at Mercury that we were to be in the space business, the space program, that wasn't even called space. We called them capsules, if you recall that, and spacecraft. It was a very temporary thing.
The fact that you've been out in space, you've had a look at the Earth from way up there, and you more than anybody, has that changed your philosophy at all?
Very much so. I've been on a kick almost, I'd say, of looking back at Earth, and I think you've all heard of us, you've heard all of us say, with the good Earth, or looking back at the Earth. And I'm particularly enthused about developing what we have on the surface of the Earth through the medium of space flight. We can see broad vistas, which you can't see with an aircraft picture, for example. And the wrinkled surface of the Earth has all sorts of hidden treasures, and this is part of what I'm looking forward to doing right now is working in the Earth resources area.
For Wally Schirra, the good Earth is now his major concern. For a new generation of astronauts, however, it's the moon, 250,000 miles away. What feelings will lunar astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin experience as they walk about the new world? What will they see? Long inky shadows, a black sky, blacker than man has ever seen it because he's looking into space itself, shades of black and gray everywhere. That's what the astronauts will see as they look at their new universe. Only the silvery limb and some American flags that they brought along will add color to their world. More unreal than anything will be the Earth, a bluish ball suspended overhead, and the intense brightness of the sun, brighter than man has ever seen it. Unrelated to the landscape alone in a lifeless world, these human cutouts on black paper probably will feel lonelier than they've ever felt on Earth. Yesterday's science fiction is today's fact. The methods are different, but the important thing is that tomorrow morning, man will lift off toward the moon. This Apollo 11 mission gets to the moon just as did the dress rehearsals, Apollos 8 and 10. 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, liftoff. 9:43, into Earth orbit, 115 miles high, 17,500 miles an hour. 12:16 noon. On the second Earth revolution, the Saturn third stage speeds them up to 24,200 miles an hour. They're on the way to the moon. 12:52 p.m. The command module docks with the lunar module, jettisons the rocket's third stage. 3 days of planetary voyaging ahead. Saturday, 1:26 p.m. Eastern Time, the moon's alongside and they break to go into lunar orbit 69 miles high. 1:42 p.m. Sunday, Armstrong and Aldrin cast off in a LEM, undocked from the mothership and watchdog Michael Collins. He'll continue to circle the moon, waiting up for their return almost 28 hours later. 3:10 p.m. Sunday, Armstrong and Aldrin begin their landing approach, slow down and drop at 5 or 6 miles an hour onto the moon. 4:07 p.m. next Sunday.
It is this bullseye that is 4 days travel time, centuries of dreaming time from the face of the Earth. The years of finely tuned man-hours, the millions of finely turned parts. All of them aimed at this point in time, this point in space. The time is next Sunday. The place is the lunar surface. And for all of that, this simulation is some of what Armstrong and Aldrin will seek to accomplish during their moments on the moon. The first man out is the engineer who is simulating the actions of Apollo 11 commander Neil Armstrong. As he descends the ladder, he pulls a lanyard that pops open a kit containing many of the moon team's working implements. And he unveils an Apollo 11 plaque on his way down to the surface. It is a tedious process making this descent from the lunar module cockpit, something the astronauts have simulated with great care, something they'll do with even greater care on the moon. The commander will step first into the pod of the front landing gear. Then, after assessing the situation, he'll probably move left foot first onto the surface of the moon. Next, the commander is to take what is called a contingency sample. Using a cord-actuated scoop, he picks up a small scoop of lunar soil. The packet is on the scoop, and the packet goes into a pocket of his flight suit. It is called a contingency sample because should things go awry at this point, the commander has at least scooped up a bit of moon dust. Once this is done, it is time for the second pilot, in this case, the man who is simulating the actions of Buzz Aldrin, to make his descent to the lunar surface. Early, in what is called the Surface Operations Plan, the commander is to remove from the implements kit the compact television camera. It is a camera that performed quite well on both the Apollo 9 and the Apollo 10 flights, and it gives a black and white picture. The commander will move across the surface toward the sun, probably for a distance of about 30 feet, setting the camera in a position that it can transmit pictures of most of the moon team's surface activities back to Earth. Somewhere fairly early in the surface movements, the commander will plant the American flag on the moon. It is equipped with staves that hold it unfurled in the windless vacuum of the moon. Once the television and the flag are planted, the more serious scientific business of sample collecting gets underway. The first phase is called the bulk sample, with the commander collecting greater amounts of moon material, seeking to get a fairly wide variety. At any point, of course, Armstrong and Aldrin may alter their surface operations to meet unforeseen situations. It is foreseen, however, that they must move slowly and carefully in the untested values of the lunar environment. Another of their tasks is the removal of some rather exotic experimental gadgets from the spacecraft to be left on the moon after they leave. The package is called ESEP, Early Apollo Scientific Experiments Package. These are stored in the descent stage of the lunar module. Both astronauts are involved in taking them out and putting them into place on the lunar surface. Then, more gathering of lunar material for return to Earth. This time, a documented sample, one that is measured for position from which it is taken, from what the sun's angle is, where the vertical point is on the moon. This instrument is called a gnomon. It shows exactly what the vertical is. It has on it a color scale. Each sample that is taken up is photographed in the position it is and then put in a coded bag. The code to be read by scientists back on Earth. And the moon team also takes a stratified sample of the moon's crust. It's lifted by hammering into the surface a hollow tube and then returning the stratified sample to Earth. Among the final strenuous tasks, the junior astronauts return to the spacecraft, probably after 2 hours of activity on the surface. Then the commander sends boxes containing those lunar samples up a tether to the lunar cockpit. And finally, the commander will make a slow and deliberate and careful climb from the surface back to the limb to close up tight for a substantial rest before lifting off for home. The Apollo 11 lunar walkers will leave behind them some 30 items of lunar litter. Among those items, the expended descent stage, the spacecraft itself, a passive seismic experiment which is to record and send back to Earth measurements of moonquakes, if there are any, a laser reflector to aid in measuring critical distances between the Earth and the Moon, and they'll also leave behind them their boots. All of it equipment for the moment that Apollo 11 is aiming for this week.
Almost 22 hours after landing, one of the most critical parts of the mission for Armstrong and Aldrin. 1:55 p.m. Monday Eastern Time, lift off from the lunar surface. Using their descent stage as a launching pad, firing their ascent stage engine for the first time, it's got to work. In 7.5 minutes, boosting them to 4,117 miles an hour and up 69 miles to rendezvous with the orbiting command module at 5:32 p.m. Eastern Time next Monday.
When the command and lunar modules have docked and are locked back together again, the first priority is getting the astronauts, Aldrin and Armstrong, from the LEM back into the command module, and with them, all that they collected on the lunar surface. The problem is to prevent contamination. First, the oxygen must be pressured so that the flow of oxygen is from the command module to the lunar module. This so that moon dust doesn't drift into the main spaceship. As another precaution, Collins hands a vacuum hose and brush through to the lunar pilots. They'll use it to vacuum their spacesuits, much as one would clean an upholstered chair at home. Next, bags are passed through, bags in which Armstrong and Aldrin will put their prizes of the mission. Then, inside the LEM, they vacuum all that must be stowed in the bags. Next, the rock boxes are passed from the lunar module to Collins, Aldrin handing to Collins the packaged material which interests the scientists most. These boxes were sealed on the lunar surface and are now to be put into 2 special compartments in the lower equipment bay. There they'll stay until the plans splash down in the Pacific, and they won't be removed from their sealed containers until they're brought to the testing labs in Houston. The helmets and gloves, which were used for the walk on the moon, are then also handed back to Collins in a bag. They are to be put in one of the empty food storage compartments, empty now of its contents because they were consumed on the way to the moon. The film, too, the movies and stills, taken on the moon is bagged and sealed before it's passed into the command module. Precautions taken here, too, not just for the protection of the film, but sealed to prevent possible contamination of the Earth or any part of it. Protection just in case. And finally, after everything else to be brought back to Earth is safely stowed in the command module, Aldrin and Armstrong come back through the tunnel themselves, crawling out of their moonship, leaving it for the last time, joining Collins for the flight home. As soon as the astronauts are together in the command module again, the tunnel hatch is put back in place. This done quickly to prevent any particles of perhaps contaminated lunar dust from getting into the command module. To end this whole complicated procedure, another vacuuming. They already cleaned their spacesuits once in the LEM, but a second vacuuming now to pick up any tiny particles of lunar dirt that may have remained. Other anti-contamination procedures will continue throughout the rest of the flight. But at this stage in the mission, the next major concern will be preparation for trans-Earth injection, the trip home.
Then the last firing of the service module's big engine to boost them out of moon orbit for the long sleigh ride home. They re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, that always heart-stopping moment, at 12:37 p.m. a week from Thursday, and splash down 1,250 miles southwest of Hawaii 14 minutes later. That's the hardware of the mission. But as close as we have come to the moon, there are still questions to be answered. One of them is a scientific question, which is a matter of great concern to a good many medical men. We'll take a look at it in a moment. It just could be that the astronauts of Apollo 11 bring back germs from the moon that man is not capable of dealing with. In the words of one microbiologist, decontamination of an infested astronaut presents problems yet unsolved. There is a way to attempt to solve them.
It is at this point in past missions that bands started playing, the astronauts shook hands with the recovery crew and made little speeches. This time, they'll be treated like they had to play. For, though the odds are extremely small, there's a chance they may. Once on the water, Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin will put on special overalls and masks before getting out of their spacecraft. The outfits are formally called BIGs, for biological isolation garments. Then, the spacecraft is sealed, and it and the astronauts are sprayed with betadine, an antiseptic commonly used by surgeons to kill bacteria. It's also an ingredient of some hair shampoos and mouthwashes. It is the early part of the recovery procedure that is most often criticized. Although the contamination danger is small, some scientists think the astronauts should remain in their spacecraft and be transferred directly to a quarantine facility. If there is such a thing as lunar bacteria, it could escape into the sea when the hatch is open. And few things are more conducive to life than warm seawater. On board the recovery ship, the astronauts will scramble into a large trailer called a mobile quarantine facility. This will be their home for the next several days, as by ship and plane and truck, they are returned to the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. Parts of the trip, particularly the transfer off the ship at Hawaii, seem almost as hazardous as anything they've attempted in outer space. From Hickam Air Force Base outside Honolulu, the astronauts will be flown directly in quarantine to Ellington Air Force Base near Houston. Beside a doctor, the only other man to come in contact with the crew up to this time will be John Hirosaki. Hirosaki helped design the entirely self-contained transporter and will operate the power and air conditioning systems to be sure the total isolation is maintained.
Mr. Hirosaki, are you worried about the possibility you might wind up with some dread disease, some plague?
No, I'm not, really. I think the probability of contamination is extremely remote.
What does your wife think about this job you have?
She thinks it's very interesting, however, she doesn't particularly agree with the extended quarantine period.
Besides preparing the lunar samples and passing them through to the outside, Hirosaki will function as chief cook and bottle washer for the astronauts during the trip back to Houston.
Inside of here, we do our food preparation of airline-style meals. All we have to do is thaw the meal out, place it inside the oven, and then cook it for a preset time limit.
Living inside the transporter is about like living in a house trailer, though the beds are a lot less comfortable. There is provision for a sixth man inside, just in case someone, a frogman for instance, should accidentally come in contact with the astronauts during the recovery operation. But other than Hirosaki, the only outsiders scheduled to share the first days of quarantine with the astronauts will be a young NASA flight surgeon, Dr. William Carpentier.
We're really following them based on clinical experience. There's no new innovations, no new things that we're doing. We're following them like any physician would follow a patient for any signs of infectious disease.
Arriving at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, the astronauts will spend the remainder of their 21-day isolation period
in this $8 million special building, the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. Dr. P.R. Bell is in charge not only of the astronauts, but of the samples they've brought back from the surface of the moon.
We then get them into the vacuum laboratory and put them in some class 3 cabinets where the cabinets are tight so no gas is leaking in or out. And then these outside wrappers, which are put on to protect them, are stripped off, and all the terrestrial organisms that came from the astronauts and went on are sterilized off the outside of these boxes. The things are guaranteed to kill terrestrial spores and microorganisms. And then these boxes are washed and dried and then taken to the vacuum system, opened, and the samples are taken out and looked at. We photograph them. We chip little chips off of some of the pieces, most of the representative pieces, to send down to the biological quarantine testing. And then we photograph where the chip came off and the chips themselves. And we take some small chips for physical chemical testing to tell roughly what kind of materials, roughly what the chemical composition is, and a number of these things. But generally, most of the samples remain in the vacuum system, then sealed up in cans, vacuum-tight cans, waiting for the time when the quarantine tests are finished and we know they're safe to be distributed to other principal investigators. For every question we answer, 1,000 will grow in its place as a result of these measures. But we do hope we'll get some of the basic questions answered. For sure, whether the moon was once melted. For sure, how long these rocks sat on the surface of the moon. That we can expect to get. How long it was since these very rocks were crystallized, if they were ever melted once, or were formed in whatever form they are now, or from the time they were put together as a rock. How long was that? And a number of things of this sort we hope to find out.
But could we have gotten as much as 130 pounds of rock without sending men to the moon? The Soviet launched Saturday an unmanned space vehicle estimated to reach the moon after Apollo 11's blastoff, possibly to return lunar samples to Earth before we do. Again raises the questions of manned versus unmanned flights. Could a considerably less expensive unmanned spaceship bring back the same lunar matter that we've spent $24 billion to obtain? Since 1968, it would appear the Russians thought so. Unmanned probes, Zone 5 and 6, that orbited the moon and returned to Earth, and experimental space stations like Soyuz 4 and 5 have been the thrust of their space ventures. Their successes were not followed by any manned lunar flight attempts as far as we know, however. We asked astronomer Thomas Gold of Cornell and physicist Ralph Lapp their views on manned versus unmanned flight.
One could have indeed mounted a substantial program for the instrumented investigation of the moon, would have done more for the same money, but would you have been able to raise the money if it did not involve the degree of emotional commitment that one has to the manned program? I think probably not.
Well, from a scientific viewpoint, it certainly isn't necessary. We cannot justify in the scientific community the price of admission to the moon on the basis of the scientific information to be gained. It simply isn't worth it. I would say that, however, that decision was made by President Kennedy, and it was made on non-scientific grounds. It's essentially because it's there, because it's a competition with the Soviets, because it'll stretch our technology. There are many reasons. The scientific reason will certainly probably the last.
I'm afraid at this stage, science is certainly in the back seat. The most important thing is to make sure that everything works, of course, to bring the moon back safely. This is, of course, always a basic kind of conflict in a manned mission that is supposed to do some scientific work. And that is a conflict that NASA will have to face up to very much more in the future if manned exploration is to become successful.
I think that from the standpoint of the knowledge of our universe, it has been almost entirely gained here on Earth. It's been aided somewhat and will be aided more by instruments which get beyond the obscuring veil of the Earth's atmosphere. But I think that man, as the quester into space, is a relatively feeble instrument for perception.
For the future, I think that the unmanned program ought to have a very much larger share, and that the public ought to take it to its heart much more. You know, I could foresee an unmanned investigation of the moon, which would, to me, be just as thrilling as the manned.
I happen to know that many scientists are extremely anxious for the astronauts to land on the moon, but not for the reason you might think. They're not anxious just for them to land. They're anxious so that they can get some of the sensation over with so that we can get down to the basic stuff of science, space science, and send the instrumented probes out. These instrumented probes have had low priority. Man in space, the sensation, the spectacle, the drama, has overloaded the science. Science has played second fiddle. It has piggybacked its way into the space program.
The Soviets have done an awful lot of work in the area of the planets, and it may be difficult for us to stay ahead there. I would worry, for example, that a few years from now some very important information might come from Mars. And it would worry me if the Soviet Union were the only party that could acquire this kind of information, and we could only read it in the pages of Pravda. That would be a distressing thing.
The pros and cons of manned exploration of space will continue, but there seems to be no doubt of our emotional commitment to the search and the secrets of the moon. As the president who committed this nation to choosing the moon as a goal said, you may as well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas?
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
To many persons, there is a significance in that pledge of President Kennedy's that goes beyond the space program itself. It shows what this, the richest nation in history, can do if it puts its mind to it. To these persons, Apollo 11 demonstrates that we can end poverty, cure cancer, avoid war. To others, our commitment to outer space represents a priority we should give to other domestic and foreign matters. And the man in the street of great cities around the world offers his opinion.
What we're doing now is something experimental. We don't know what practical benefits will come out of it, but as any other experiments in science, years from now, this may be something that will be very beneficial to the whole world and the United States.
We should go out into outer space, make sure we get there, beat the Russians and any foreign power, and put our flag up there, just in case. It could have a military significance, and it cannot. This we don't know, but we cannot gamble. The security of this country is far greater than all the money involved, as far as I'm concerned. And every citizen should feel that way.
Tell me, sir, do you think all the money they're spending on the space program is worth it?
No, I don't think it's entirely worth it.
What do you think the money should be going for?
I think it should be going for America, for the poor people here in New York City.
I'm saying, as a Frenchman, as a citizen of the world, what do you think of this enormous American effort to put a man on the moon?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's almost unbelievable, but I think it's too much money. It's a pure waste of money.
Well, do you think that in a matter of competition with Russia, for instance, that this is necessary?
Yes, that was necessary. Because with you the moon is safe, with the Russian I would not feel the same thing.
In the U.S., there are problems like racial disputes, and in this country there are campus troubles. Although I don't know much about the military value, I think anyone who conquers the moon can conquer the whole world. You don't think they should be going to the moon?
Of course not. Plenty of things to do with the money on the earth. To see that there's not such a lot of poverty, not such a lot of misery, not such a lot of wars. What are you going to the moon for?
No, I don't think there's no air up there, so how can anybody live there unless they live on something else besides air? I don't think nobody lives there at all. At all.
Would you want to be on this trip?
Yes, I would rather like it. It's rather a bit dangerous.
In the middle of June, before the moon fever struck, the CBS News survey conducted by telephone sought the opinion of 510 adults about our space program. The program takes a rather low priority compared to government projects like crime prevention, poverty programs, and military defense. The public's evenly divided on whether the money we've spent so far to get to the moon has been worth it. Looking beyond the moon landing, about half the public wants to continue our space effort at the current level. 3 out of 10 Americans want to reduce our efforts, and only 1 out of 6 Americans wants to increase space exploration. Looking even further ahead to future exploration of Mars, the public, by a margin of over 2 to 1, believes sending men to Mars is not worth the money and effort it would take to get there. And not all public figures agree either.
I am for the space program, but I want to see it in its right priority. One which will let it continue into the future and not have to be cut back or abandoned, because the nation that supports it is hobbled by internal disorder. And so once the lunar landing and exploration are completed, a substantial portion of the space budget can be diverted to the pressing problems here at home.
I want to make it very clear. We can have a space program and clean up our cities. It isn't a lack of tools, and it's not a lack of resources. It's a lack of program, a lack of will. And what we need in our government and what we need in the Congress is the same kind of committee towards making our cities livable as we've had in getting to the moon.
I would like to see in a package that everybody can understand, simply down, and not too interlarded with scientific figures and facts. What did they discover? What does it add up to? What was the overall cost finally? And let's just take a look at the sheet. That's the way you do in business. Well, took a fling at this kind of a commodity, didn't turn out so well. And here is the profit we made, or here's what we lost. That'll be the balance sheet. And the country's entitled to a balance sheet.
I think the space adventure is far and away the most glamorous and exciting adventure of this generation. It's going to be for a long, long time. But it's not the most urgent problem. Far more urgent problem is clean air, clean water, improved housing, improved education, a better life on Earth, achieving peace on Earth. These, it seems to me, are far, far more important priorities than being first in space.
I would like to take all that we have done and be sure that we utilize all the knowledge that we have gained up to now and follow through to milk the entire Apollo program of every benefit that can come from it. I do hope that we'll try to provide a measured, reasonable distribution of resources for this effort, because I think it will pay us back hundredfold in benefits, in navigation, in communication, health, industrial development, in employment. I think it's one of the best investments that we've ever made.
The great debate about America and space is an exercise in freedom, the freedom of choice. How shall a people use its excess energies and resources? Here at the launch site for our most spectacular adventure, the doubts, and they are minor doubts, concern the success of this flight and the safety of the astronauts. In Washington and elsewhere, the doubts concern future flights, their number, their cost, and their benefits, as if the success of Apollo 11 were already assured. We are a people who hate failure. It's un-American. It is a fair guess that failure of Apollo 11 would not curtail future space programs, but re-energize them. Success may well curtail them, because for a long time to come, future flights will seem anticlimactic, chiefly of laboratory, not popular interest, and the pressure to divert these great sums of money to inner space, terra firma, and inner man will steadily grow. The core of the argument is philosophical, almost religious.
and concerns the nature of man and his society. There are men here passionately convinced that we cannot plan our opportunities, but must take them at the tide when they come. That without new frontiers always beckoning, an energetic people rusts and corrodes. That space is not only the cutting edge for science today, but a moral substitute for war that could give the quarreling human race some sense of common identity, of brotherhood. And there are men convinced with equal passion that this adventure, however majestic its drama, is only one more act of escape, that it is man once again running away from himself and his real needs. That we are approaching the bright side of the moon with the dark side of ourselves, with chauvinism, competitive aggression, and that the chief uses of space will be military in the end. We do know that history has never proceeded by a rational plan. Not even science knows what it is doing, much beyond the immediate experiment. We know that the human brain will soon know more about the composition of the moon than it knows about the human brain. We will know why the moon is what and where it is before we know why human beings do what they do. We are still closer to our animal origins than to any millennium in peace. It is possible that the divine spark in man will consume him in flames, that the big brain will prove our ultimate flaw like the dinosaur's big body, that the metal plaque Armstrong and Aldrin expect to place on the moon will become man's epitaph. But the future has never revealed itself. It is made step by step, moment by moment. The next great moment is now at hand. The world waits and the astronauts sleep. This is Eric Silverhead at the Kennedy Space Center. So on the eve of this epic voyage, everything proceeds apace with the great drama which is Apollo 11. Believers in the space program like to point out that just 0.5% of our projected gross national product would supply $5 billion a year, enough to fund our search of space to Mars and beyond. But we have come so far in such a short time. If you have a 12-year-old child, he or she is the age of the American space program, already having gone through its period of most rapid growth, but with so far to go. In 1,000 years from the day when in the history books World War II is but a parenthetical episode, and the Roosevelts and the Stalins and the Churchills are but footnotes, descendants of that child will be memorizing that date, July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong of Wapakoneta, Ohio, first set feet on the moon. This is Walter Cronkite at the Kennedy Space Center.
CBS News has presented Man on the Moon. The epic journey of Apollo 11 on the eve of that historic event. Sponsored by the International Paper Company, where good ideas grow on trees. And by Western Electric, manufacturing and supply unit of the Bell System. And by Kellogg's. Kellogg's puts more in your morning. Walter Cronkite and Wally Schirra will head the team of experts who will bring you television's finest coverage of the flight of Apollo 11. The big event begins tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, 5 Central Time, 3 Pacific Time on CBS.
All is ready at the Cape for the launch of the Apollo 11.
That was Don Harrison of KCMO News, Kansas City, Missouri. The 5 speakers heard giving their opinions of the space program in order were Democratic Senator Edward M. Kennedy of Massachusetts, former Democratic Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey, now school teacher in Minnesota, Republican Senator Everett Dirksen of Illinois, Democratic Senator William Proxmire of Wisconsin, and former Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson.